Hello, my name is Celine Gray, and when I was 14, my family disappeared, just left a note on the fridge that said, "Figure it out." No warning, no goodbye, no explanation. I had to survive in a cold, dusty storage unit, shower at the YMCA, and pretend the world hadn't abandoned me. 11 years later, after clawing my way through every shadow they left behind, I became someone they couldn't ignore. And suddenly, they wanted back in my life. But why now? After everything? Can people really change? Or is this just another performance? What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you most had written you out of your own story? The morning was too quiet. I remember opening my eyes and immediately sensing something was off. The usual clatter of spoons against ceramic, my mother's voice humming along with some old Patsy Cline song on the radio. Gone. The hallway outside my bedroom felt cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out overnight. I stayed under the blanket a minute longer, listening, waiting for footsteps, or even the familiar creak of the fridge door. Nothing. At 6:40 a.m., the Seattle sky hung gray, the kind of overcast that always made you feel like the day hadn't properly started yet. I pulled on my hoodie, the blue one with a rip on the left sleeve, and padded downstairs. The scent of bacon or burnt toast should have been in the air, but all I smelled was nothing. Stillness, like a house abandoned after a storm. The kitchen looked untouched, spotless, too spotless. No plates in the sink, no coffee left half poured. Not even crumbs on the counter. I checked the living room. The TV remote still sat on the arm of the couch, just like always. But the family photos, the ones that lined the wall, gone, just the nails left, bare and sticking out of the drywall. I called out once. "Mom?" No answer. Then louder. "Dylan? Kendra?" Still nothing. I was sure this was a prank. My brother had pulled worse stunts before. Once, he convinced me we had to evacuate for a gas leak and had me sitting outside with our dog and a flashlight for hours. But this didn't feel like a prank. I opened the fridge, and that's when I saw it. A small, yellow, sticky note, pressed dead center on the door. "You're smart. You'll figure it out, Mom." That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just that. I stood there staring at the note for what felt like forever. My hand trembled when I reached for my phone. I dialed Mom. No ring. Straight to voicemail. Dad's line too. I texted Dylan. Nothing. I ran outside barefoot, hoping maybe they were just around the block, maybe grabbing breakfast. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Langley, was watering her roses. I rushed over, my voice cracking before I even got a full sentence out. "They moved out last night," she said, like she was telling me it might rain later. "Real quiet. U-Haul and everything." "Your mom said it was a sudden job relocation." I don't remember what I said back. My ears buzzed. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. For hours, I sat on the porch, arms wrapped around my knees, just waiting. I kept thinking they'd drive back up the driveway, that someone would pop out from behind a bush and yell, "Gotcha!" like it was a messed up version of a birthday surprise. But the sun went down. The sky turned dark. The porch light flickered on by itself. Still no one came. That night, I slept inside with the front door unlocked. I didn't want to miss the sound of tires rolling in, didn't want to risk them thinking I'd gone somewhere and then leave again. 3 days passed. I lived on whatever food was left in the pantry. Dry cereal, a can of beans, a half-empty jar of peanut butter. I ate with my fingers. The water got cut first, then the power. I remember opening the fridge just to feel the last bit of cold air before it faded. It was on day 4 that I finally stopped waiting. Something inside me just shifted. I went upstairs and looked around my room. Posters still up. Bed still unmade. As if time had paused for everyone except me. I packed my school backpack, just some clothes, my old journal, a toothbrush, that peanut butter jar. I stood in the hallway one last time, took a deep breath. "If they left," I whispered, "then so must I." I didn't know where I was going, but I remembered an old storage facility I passed sometimes on the way to school. It was down by Fremont, tucked behind a gas station and a line of sad little stores that always looked like they were about to close for good. The walk took nearly 2 hours. My legs were sore, and the backpack got heavier with every block, but I found it. The place had rusted fences and a broken keypad gate. I snuck in behind a delivery guy who didn't even glance my way. Unit 36B was open, empty, must have been abandoned months ago. It smelled of dust and damp cardboard, but it was dry, safer than a park bench or bus stop. I pulled the rolling door halfway down and sat on the cold concrete floor. My hoodie became a pillow, my backpack a blanket. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the rustling sounds outside. Rats or wind, I couldn't tell. I didn't cry that night. Not really. It was worse than crying. It was a silence that went too deep, the kind that wraps itself around your lungs and makes breathing feel like effort. At dawn, I walked 2 miles to the nearest YMCA. Told the front desk I was waiting for my mom to pick me up from swim class. Used the restroom. Took a shower with clothes still on, so no one would notice. I learned quick. Always act like you belong. Always have a line ready. Fake confidence was better than looking like a kid left behind. Days blurred together. I scavenged what I could, used laundromats to clean up. Used library Wi-Fi to look up shelters, but never had the nerve to go inside. The storage unit became my world, my hiding spot, my cocoon. On the second night, while listening to the rain tapping on the metal roof, I pulled out my journal and wrote 6 words across an empty page. If no one's coming for me. I paused, looked around at the dim light from the cracked roof, at the worn-out hoodie I used as a blanket, at the jar of peanut butter almost gone. They don't deserve to know what I become. I tore my name off the mailbox that night. Walked past my old school the next day, didn't even glance at it. Every familiar place became foreign. Every memory felt like someone else's life. I wasn't just abandoned, I was erased. There's a strange power in being unseen, not the magical, liberating kind people fantasize about, but the aching, hollow kind that makes you question if you were ever real to begin with. 2 weeks had passed since they left. The nights had gotten colder. My breath would form tiny clouds even inside the storage unit. I'd started lining the floor with flattened cardboard boxes and stolen newspapers just to keep from freezing. But that morning, something inside me told me to test reality again, to see if the world still remembered I existed. I walked back to school like I belonged there. I even packed a lunch, just peanut butter crackers in a plastic bag, and wore my old backpack like nothing had changed. The idea was to blend in, to slide into the day as if I hadn't missed a beat. Maybe it had all been some mistake. Maybe this nightmare had a loophole. When I walked into the front office, the secretary glanced up, barely. She had that same clipped tone adults used when they were too tired to pretend. I smiled, rehearsed. "Hi, I think my schedule might have changed." She typed a few strokes, squinted at the screen, then looked up. "Name? Celine. Celine Morano." Pause. Click. Type. Click. Her brow wrinkled slightly. "We don't have a Celine Morano in the system." My stomach twisted. "What?" I said. She rotated the monitor slightly toward me. "There's no student by that name enrolled." "But I've been here since 6th grade. My locker is 182. I'm in Mr. Claiborne's English class. You can check." Her voice turned mechanical. "I'm sorry. Are you new to the district? Sometimes transfers get lost in the system." I backed away before I said something I'd regret. In the hallway, familiar faces walked past me, kids I'd sat next to for years. Some glanced at me with the awkwardness of strangers who almost recognize you but aren't sure why. A few teachers nodded, hesitated, then moved on without a word. I was suddenly a ghost haunting my own life. My locker? Cleared out. The combination sticker peeled off, as if someone had scrubbed me clean. Outside, I sat on the bench near the flagpole. The cold metal burned through my jeans, but I didn't move, just stared at the street. They didn't just abandon me, they'd erased me. By that evening, I was back at the public library, sitting near the back where no one looked twice. I'd started pretending I was a homeschool student doing independent study. No one ever questioned that. I read old textbooks, took notes I didn't need, and occasionally talked to the elderly volunteers who thought I was someone's kid waiting to be picked up. I let them think that, It was easier than the truth. I stopped using my last name, just Celine. It was simpler, less baggage. I wrote in my journal every night, things like how long I could go without food before the headaches started, what days the YMCA showers were least crowded, how to make a scarf into a pillow. I didn't expect anything anymore. Not help, not love, not justice. That was the only way to keep going. But then came the night that broke even that. It was raining, again. I was in the waiting room of a women's shelter, not staying, just warming up for a few hours. The couch smelled like mothballs and sadness. A small TV mounted on the wall played a local parenting segment on mute, with closed captions scrolling at the bottom. And there she was. My mother, Vera Morano. Hair perfect, lipstick sharp, posture regal. Raising strong, independent children is about hard choices, the caption read. She smiled into the camera. Dylan stood next to her, straight-faced in a polo shirt. Kendra, my older sister, waved to the crowd. The banner beneath them read, Seattle Families, Inspiring Parenting Stories. I couldn't breathe. Hard choices, she'd said. On television, as if what she'd done to me was noble. As if I were some inconvenient branch she had to prune to let the rest of the tree grow. A woman sitting nearby glanced at me when I stood too fast. I mumbled something about needing air and stumbled out into the street. The rain hit me like slaps, sharp, cold, humiliating. She'd replaced me with a story, polished, marketable. I wasn't a daughter. I was dead weight she cut off and buried. Back in the storage unit that night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the metal wall until morning. Then I pulled out a black marker I'd found in a lost and found box and wrote across the wall, Hard choices? The letters looked shaky, angry, alive. I started recording my thoughts on an old MP3 player I'd found in a donation bin. At first, it was just to hear my own voice, proof I existed. Then the recordings became more intentional. I'd say things like, Today, I watched a woman lie to the world. Or, being invisible hurts less than being remembered wrong. I didn't know it yet, but those recordings were the start of something bigger. A future voice. A channel through which I'd one day speak louder than they ever expected. One entry in my journal read, If I'm a ghost to them, then I'll haunt them in silence. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even want answers. I just wanted to exist on my own terms. And if they couldn't handle that, they could keep pretending. 3 years later, silence had done more than teach me patience. It had forged a steel inside me I didn't know existed. I was 17 now, taller than some of my peers, with eyes that had seen too much, too early. My hair fell in careless waves, clothes mismatched, yet functional. Every inch of me screamed, I exist, even if no one else recognized it. Seattle was behind me. I had learned to navigate the city's public spaces without drawing attention, memorizing schedules, timing bathroom breaks at the YMCA, and knowing which libraries had the least scrutinizing eyes. But whispers reached me eventually, rumors that my family had relocated to Boise, Idaho. My chest tightened as if the air itself resisted the thought. Could they really have gone on, unbothered, leaving me to rot in the corners of their negligence? On a chilly Thursday morning, I set my trembling hands to writing. The paper smelled faintly of pine from the stationery store, an odd comfort. I'm sorry for whatever I did. I'm still here. Can I come home? I folded the note carefully, sliding it into an envelope. The postmark said Seattle, a small rebellion against the void of acknowledgement that had followed me for years. I waited. Day after day, I checked the post office window, heart hammering with every hand that reached for mail, but never mine. Weeks passed. The mailbox remained stubbornly empty. The silence was deafening, but I wasn't ready to surrender hope yet. One gray afternoon, while walking along the old streets I used to call home, I dared to peek through the hedges of my childhood house. A stranger's car sat in the driveway, children's laughter spilling from behind the curtains. My throat closed. I made my way to the trash bins near the curb, hesitating only for a second before rifling through discarded papers. Among them, soaked and torn, was my letter. Someone had read it, or at least known it existed, and still discarded it like a dead thing. My hands shook, clenching the sodden fragments, feeling the sharp sting of a rejection so calculated, so conscious that it could have broken glass. And yet, as I stared at the puddle-reflected sky, something ignited inside me, fury tempered with clarity. If they had refused me, the world would not. The world would wait, listen, and witness my existence on my terms. Hope, however, came in the briefest flicker. On a corner near a dusty grocery store, a familiar figure approached. My uncle, my father's younger brother, eyes wary but softened by memory, handed me a wrapped sandwich. "I always wondered, what really happened?" he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "You can stay at my place tonight." I hadn't eaten a real meal in days. Hunger gnawed at my bones, reminding me that survival was still urgent, more pressing than nostalgia or pride. I accepted, following him down the dimly lit street, smelling the faint perfume of human kindness, so foreign and fragile after years of betrayal. Inside his modest apartment, the warmth of a small radiator and the faint smell of brewing coffee felt like a temporary salvation. I ate quietly, eyes darting, imagining the world that had erased me, but also the possibility of someone caring, however briefly. Morning arrived with the sun spilling through thin curtains. We shared silence over stale coffee. Then his phone rang. A sharp, clipped voice from the other end. "You're encouraging rebellion," Vera said. My chest tightened, the word rebellion burning against my ribs. The warmth from the night evaporated. By afternoon, I was politely asked to leave. My uncle looked away, conflicted, muttering, "I'm sorry, Celine." The word hung in the air, meaningless. It wasn't about kindness or love, it was about reputation. My presence, even for a moment, was a liability. Walking away from his apartment, I felt the cold wind whip at my cheeks. I hugged my arms, shivering less from the chill and more from the sting of betrayal. "Again," I whispered, half to myself, half as a vow to the universe. "If no one will carry me, I'll build my own damn road." From that day forward, my quiet existence gained weight. I registered for college online, listing my storage unit as a mailing address. I learned to navigate bureaucracy with a cunning I'd honed over years of invisibility. Every form, every request for verification, every rejected application was an exercise in patience and planning. My notebook overflowed with strategies, addresses, and pseudonyms. Each page, each scribbled plan, was a step toward reclaiming myself. I began to understand that survival was more than mere endurance, it was preparation. If my family could erase me, the world could try, but I would be ready. I had honed silence into a weapon, invisibility into a shield. Hunger had become familiarity, betrayal a tutor, and loneliness a mentor. That evening, sitting on the cold pavement outside a corner cafe I couldn't afford, I listened to the chatter of families, couples, and strangers, each unaware of the girl who had once been lost to their negligence. And I understood. The world didn't need to acknowledge me to notice me. I could make my own presence, quiet yet undeniable, through actions, intelligence, and endurance. I picked up my recorder, whispering thoughts I would later share with a wider world. I am here. I have been here. And I will not vanish again. College applications asked for a home address. I gave them a storage unit number. It was a quiet act of rebellion and, oddly, of self-respect. I realized at that moment that my survival had become more than just existing. It was about creating a version of myself that no one could erase. For weeks, I sat in the dim light of my storage unit, filling out forms, typing essays on a battered laptop powered by the YMCA's free Wi-Fi. I had crafted a new identity, Celine E. Gray. No family name, no traces of the past, just the essence of me distilled into words and achievements. I wrote candidly about resilience, about surviving without support, without recognition, without even the smallest thread of guidance. I refused to play victim. Every word was a quiet defiance against the years of abandonment. Applying to 12 colleges, I found a rhythm in the act of planning my future. Each essay, each application was a deliberate step away from invisibility, a proclamation that I existed and that my story mattered. Weeks later, acceptance letters arrived. Among them, a full scholarship to the University of Washington stood out. My pulse raced as I read the words, Celine E. Gray, full tuition, housing, and living stipend. I laughed softly, incredulous. For the first time in years, the world seemed to recognize my value, not out of obligation, but merit. The transition to college was not seamless. Initially, I slept in the library stacks, blankets pulled tightly around me, earphones blaring softly with music that reminded me of home that wasn't really mine. By mid-semester, campus housing became available, and I moved into a small, dimly lit room decorated only with essentials and notebooks full of observations, essays, and recordings. My podcast, Figure It Out, began as an audio diary, raw and unedited. My voice carried the weight of years spent unheard, connecting with listeners who were navigating their own invisible battles. For those who were asked to survive without being taught how, I whispered into the microphone, and somewhere, someone listened and understood. Then came the subtle reminders that the past never truly lets go. My name appeared on the Rising Voices chart for campus podcasts. My cousin, whom I barely recognized, messaged me on social media. "Wow, you made it! Mom said you ran away years ago." My stomach nodded. The words were innocuous enough, yet they carried the weight of scrutiny I had not invited. Then, an email from Vera, my mother, appeared in my inbox. "So proud of your success. Let's reconnect." I stared at the screen, the blue glow reflecting off my tired eyes. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years I had lived without a home, without their care. Just hollow pride, carefully wrapped in a digital message. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. It hovered there, a reminder that recognition could be as empty as the silence they had once maintained. Every time I played a new podcast episode, I embedded small truths and lessons within my stories. I wanted listeners to understand that resilience wasn't flashy or immediate. It was quiet, meticulous, and often solitary. Yet, even as I immersed myself in this new life, the undercurrent of betrayal and abandonment lingered. It shaped the boundaries I kept, the trust I cautiously offered, and the way I navigated friendships and colleagues alike. Evenings in my small dorm room carried the familiar hush of introspection. I would review listener feedback, carefully noting the resonance of certain words, the subtle connections to my own experiences. In these quiet hours, I realized that the world was vast, indifferent, and at times cruel, but it also offered spaces for reinvention. I had been invisible before, but now, invisibility became a cloak I wore deliberately, a shield rather than a punishment. Then came the first sign that my success had not gone unnoticed. A relative sent a vague message, laced with curiosity and the faintest hint of admiration. Another cousin tagged me in a celebratory post on social media, praising my accomplishments in a tone that bordered on disbelief. They hadn't acknowledged my struggles, my absence, my years in silence. They only recognized the outcome. I sat back in my chair, breathing slowly, and recorded my podcast for the evening. My voice, calm yet imbued with resolve, filled the room. "Sometimes," I said, "the loudest lies come dressed as praise." I paused, letting the words linger. For once, the silence was mine. I didn't have to respond. I didn't have to forgive. The recognition of my existence would come on my terms, not theirs. Night descended, and the campus grew quiet. I stepped outside to walk the familiar path toward the library, where I had started this chapter of reinvention. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and I felt a sense of cautious triumph. I had survived the erasure, the hunger, the betrayal, and emerged with something tangible: knowledge, voice, autonomy. The path ahead was still uncertain, and yet, for the first time, it felt entirely mine. Link to next chapter. I never said yes to their invitation, but they decided to come anyway, and the moment they stepped on campus, they stepped into a reality I had built without them. I never said yes to their invitation, but they decided to come anyway. The sun had barely climbed over the Seattle skyline when I woke to the sharp ping of notifications on my phone. A series of tags, posts, and comments flooded my feed. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. The first image made my stomach twist. A photo of me at 16, sitting alone at a park picnic table, cupcake in hand, smiling at the camera timer I had set myself. The caption read, "Throwback to our sweet Celine's 16th birthday, #family first." It took a moment for my brain to process. My solo celebration, the one I had quietly carved out to mark my own survival, had been appropriated and turned into a story of familial togetherness. I felt violated. My memory, my private moment, had been co-opted and reshaped without a single word of acknowledgement. The image carried the illusion of happiness I had never truly known. My pulse quickened as the creeping heat of betrayal rose. Days later, the pattern repeated itself in a more public arena. My podcast listeners started tagging me in posts related to an online fundraiser. Vera, ever the orchestrator of appearances, had used a photo of me from my freshman year of college to promote a parenting foundation. Headline: Our biggest lesson in resilience, my youngest daughter. My image, my story, weaponized for their gain. I felt exposed, not just emotionally but socially. The audacity of it gnawed at me. My name and likeness were being leveraged to uphold a narrative that ignored every shred of truth. I didn't call. I didn't write an angry email. Instead, I recorded an episode for my podcast. I titled it Resilience or Robbery. I spoke carefully, painting vivid pictures of how pride can be manipulated, how accomplishments can be stolen, how love can masquerade as control. I didn't mention anyone by name, but every listener who knew my story would understand. The act of speaking, of laying bare the mechanics of my betrayal without melodrama, felt like reclaiming a portion of myself. The day after I posted the episode, a family friend sent me a private message. "Your mom is planning a public family reunion. Just a heads up." My eyes narrowed. My heart thumped. Not with fear, but with a clear, cold understanding. They thought they could waltz back into my life, stage a performance, and rewrite our history. I replied with 3 words that carried more weight than any diatribe. I'm not afraid. Evening fell, casting long shadows over my dorm room as I stared at the faint glow of my laptop. Vera's influence was a constant undercurrent now. Just when I thought I had control over the narrative, she tried to spin my existence into something malleable, something convenient for her image. That night, she posted another story on Instagram. "Looking forward to reconnecting with all my children very soon, #family first." The casual optimism of her words, the emoji sprinkled carelessly like confetti, was a provocation. I clenched my fists, not in rage, but as a reminder of the power I had quietly accumulated. I walked outside later, the city humming softly around me. Streetlights glimmered on wet sidewalks as I considered the dynamics of my family, the twisted combination of pride, deception, and entitlement that had defined their interactions with me. For a moment, I allowed myself a small smile. They had misjudged my silence, underestimated my capacity for strategic patience. They assumed absence equaled weakness. They assumed invisibility meant surrender. I reviewed my plans for the upcoming semester, the careful balance of classes, research, and podcast episodes. Everything I had built was intentional, a demonstration of competence and self-sufficiency. No one could co-opt this chapter of my life without consequence. I would attend their so-called reunion, not as a meek daughter seeking approval, but as someone who had mastered the art of quiet observation, ready to assert her truth. I paused by the small fountain near campus, watching water ripple over smooth stones. My mind replayed every slight, every erased memory, every stolen moment that had brought me here. I felt a simmering sense of empowerment beneath the sting of betrayal. My plan was meticulous: acknowledge no one, reveal what needed revealing, and keep the upper hand. Their attempts at narrative control would meet the hard wall of reality. I was no longer the girl who vanished quietly into a storage unit. At home, or what passed for a home in my life, the night stretched on. I carefully crafted a new podcast episode in my mind, one that would air the week of the family gathering. Every sentence, every pause, calculated to illuminate truth without surrendering dignity. This wasn't about revenge in the childish sense. It was a demonstration of agency, a precise declaration that the story of Celine was hers alone to tell. By the time the campus fell silent, I had outlined the episode, set the recording schedule, and reviewed every detail. I placed my phone on the bedside table, the notifications still buzzing faintly with updates from social media, each one a reminder that they existed in my world but did not control it. I breathed in deeply, sensing a calm before the storm of confrontation. The tension of anticipation, the weight of impending reunion, filled the room, not with fear, but with readiness. This time, I wasn't going to just sit and watch them write the ending. The morning had barely broken over the University of Washington campus when my phone buzzed insistently. A number I recognized instantly, the one I had blocked months ago, flashed on the screen. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let it ring twice, 3 times, like a countdown. Finally, curiosity overrode caution. The voice on the other end was flat, almost rehearsed. "Celine, everyone sacrifices something. That was yours." My father. The words were brief, antiseptic, like a medical report rather than a message to his daughter. There was no warmth, no apology, not even a hint of remorse. The calm in his tone contrasted sharply with the fury simmering in my chest. I felt that old stab of abandonment, but unlike the 14-year-old who had curled up in a storage unit, I didn't flinch. My anger was quiet, methodical, ready. After the call, I sat at my small desk in the cramped dorm room that smelled faintly of coffee and old textbooks. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I recalled the Google Drive we had once shared, an account I had maintained in secret since my escape. Screenshots of conversations, group chats, email threads, all the evidence of my erasure, my abandonment, and their casual cruelty were still there, waiting. Documents with Vera's signature deregistering me from school. Screenshots showing the family deliberating on my disappearance. They thought I had nothing, but I had everything I needed. I compressed the files into a single folder and titled it deliberately, "What You Left Behind." The name felt satisfying. Each keystroke carried years of quiet pain, years of strategic planning, every long walk to the storage unit, every skipped meal, every night spent writing in the shadows of library stacks, all distilled into this folder. The first episode dropped that evening on my podcast, Figure It Out, with a title as stark as my mood, Evidence. I didn't narrate it at length. My voice was calm, measured, almost chilling in its clarity. "These documents speak louder than I ever could," I said, letting the digital files carry the weight of the story. Comments flooded in. People were stunned, shocked by the audacity of my disclosure, yes, but more than that, by the clarity of the narrative that had been silenced for years. The family's reaction was instantaneous. DMs from cousins, friends, distant aunts. One message read, "You really didn't have to do this publicly." I paused for a long moment before typing back. Neither did they. The words hit send with a faint, almost imperceptible click, a punctuation mark that symbolized the distance I had carved between myself and them. The next morning, campus coffee in hand, I walked past the fountain, its water catching early sunlight, refracting it into sharp, fleeting rainbows. I remembered the silence of my storage unit, the cold nights, the hunger gnawing at my stomach, and how I had emerged from it piece by piece, stronger than anyone could have imagined. The podcast had given me a platform, a voice that couldn't be erased, a permanence they couldn't touch. Then, a new email arrived, a journalist seeking verification for a feature on generational trauma. "I'd love to verify your story for an upcoming series," it read. The words made my chest tighten, but not with fear, with strategy, with awareness. This was an opportunity, a bridge to expose truths larger than my own, to show that what had happened to me was neither unique nor isolated. My story could carry weight, and now it would. I spent the afternoon organizing materials, screenshots, audio clips. Each piece was a building block, a careful construction of irrefutable evidence. By late evening, I recorded notes for the next podcast episode, planning a series that would not only reveal the facts, but dissect them, layer by layer, showing the mechanisms of manipulation, betrayal, and silent cruelty. Night fell over Seattle, the streets shimmering from a light drizzle. I sat by my dorm window, listening to distant traffic, reflecting on the journey from abandoned child to strategist of truth. Every betrayal, every hollow attempt at erasing me had been catalogued, memorized, and weaponized, not for vengeance, but for justice, for visibility, for acknowledgement of what I had endured. I knew that retaliation would provoke response. My family, so long entrenched in control, would react, perhaps even escalate, but I was ready. My words, my evidence, my calm yet unyielding voice were my shields. I wasn't fragile anymore, not in the way I once was at 14. Now truth had teeth, and I was holding the leash. As the city lights blurred into the night, I drafted a final message for the day, scheduling the next podcast release. Every detail mattered, from timestamp to phrasing, to ensure the narrative could not be twisted or stolen. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the quiet satisfaction of precision settle in. They had thought silence would be my prison. Instead, it had been my forge. The moment I realized they had sent someone to try to silence me, a strange clarity settled over me. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The city lights flickered outside my dorm window, the distant hum of traffic blending with the faint whir of my laptop fan. It was almost peaceful, if you ignored the pounding in my chest, the heat of righteous fury simmering just beneath the surface. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee, and the warmth seeped into my hands as if it could anchor my resolve. Vera had been quick to react. After the release of my podcast episode, I anticipated a storm, but I hadn't expected her attempts at damage control to be quite so spectacularly flawed. She announced a live broadcast on social media, a staged clarification, a picture-perfect display of a mother trying to smooth over the cracks of her past. I watched from my small rented apartment, hidden behind the anonymity of my screen, as the camera wobbled and then suddenly jerked. Her sister, my aunt, was clearly tipsy, trying to help with lighting and angles when she inadvertently left her microphone on and started speaking freely. We told Vera it was cruel, leaving Celine like that. But she said it was necessary, said she didn't fit the mold, my aunt slurred, oblivious to the camera. My breath caught, my heart thumped. Years of erasure, of invisibility, now projected in an accidental confession that spread like wildfire. Twitter exploded. Figure It Out became a trending hashtag within hours. Screenshots multiplied, shared and reshared with commentary, outrage, and disbelief. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I had never intended to reveal my identity, never sought the spotlight. But the truth had a way of forcing its own stage. Then came the verification. A listener, meticulous and determined, cross-referenced voice patterns from old episodes with the accidental audio snippets from the live stream. Within minutes, the post went viral. Celine Gray is Figure It Out. This is her story. My voice, my life, my struggle. It could no longer be hidden. The fallout was instantaneous. Former classmates, teachers, and even local nonprofits reached out, apologizing for having ignored my disappearance, my years of struggle, and the silence that had enveloped me. Vera's carefully curated image of the perfect family began to crumble. Sponsors pulled out of her fundraiser, citing ethical concerns. Her foundation's credibility wavered under the weight of public scrutiny. And documentary crews? They reached out, not to her, but to me. I had become the narrator of my own life, the authority on my truth. Sitting down with my microphone, I recorded a new episode, my voice calm but firm. Sometimes, silence isn't peace, it's a war tactic. And I've stopped being quiet. Every word was measured, deliberate, an act of reclamation. I was no longer the invisible girl in the storage unit, the forgotten child in a suburban house. I was a voice with reach, resonance, and most importantly, control. Even with victory in sight, vulnerability lingered. I knew the calls and messages would keep coming. Vera, desperate, left a voicemail, the tone both pleading and commanding. You need to stop. You're ruining your own name." I listened once, twice, then muted the phone. Her words were meaningless. My name, my story, my voice. Those were the only things she had failed to take from me. I walked to the small balcony, the evening air cool against my skin, and let the city's hum fill my ears. The wind carried faint laughter from a nearby bar, the rhythmic clatter of a late-night bus, and the distant siren wail. All ordinary sounds, yet to me, they felt like a battlefield. Each ordinary moment a testament to my survival, my tenacity, and the life I had clawed back from absence. I thought about the people who had doubted me, who had ignored the signs, who had whispered and laughed at my expense, and I understood, fully, that they had underestimated the quiet, the stillness that I had cultivated. They had thought silence meant submission. They had been wrong. Silence had been my armor, my rehearsal, my strategy. And now, with every episode, every verified document, every viral post, silence had become my sword. By the time night fully descended, I had mapped out the next week's episodes, structured the evidence, and prepared my statements for any reporters who might call. The adrenaline from the livestream revelations was fading, replaced by a steady, controlled determination. I would not retaliate blindly. I would be precise, unwavering, and absolutely terrifyingly strategic. Every leak, every confession, every document, calculated. The storm had broken, but I was standing at its eye, calm, composed, and entirely in control. And while the world around me reacted in chaos, I felt a strange serenity. The girl who had once been erased from her school, hidden from her own family, ignored by the very people meant to nurture her, had finally emerged. Not just as a survivor, but as a force to be reckoned with. The morning light streamed through the blinds, soft and pale, as if the universe itself wanted to remind me that every shadow from my past could no longer touch me. My name, the one thing they had never managed to take, felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because of the memories it carried, lighter because it had become mine entirely, untainted by their lies. The email notification blinked insistently on my screen. Vera. She was reaching out. Again. The lawyer's letter was formal, courteous, almost syrupy in tone, but I knew better. They always wrapped their manipulations in civility. I opened the Zoom link, the camera flickering to life, revealing Vera's face, streaked with tears and mascara, the corners of her mouth trembling. I miss you, she said, voice breaking. I made mistakes. We can rebuild. She paused, as though waiting for my forgiveness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. Then came the slip, the telltale sign that everything was transactional. We just need your signature to move forward with the film deal. I stared, feeling the past 3 decades of abandonment and betrayal crystallize in that single sentence. I didn't respond. I didn't blink. I smiled, small and knowing, and ended the call. The weight of years pressed into my chest, but it no longer bent me. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill the space around me, before reaching for an old hard drive tucked beneath my bed. The photo emerged immediately, the one from my first night in the storage unit. I remembered the chill of the floor, the smell of cardboard, the quiet desperation as I clutched a peanut butter jar like it was a treasure chest. That solitary image held more truth than 1,000 staged family photos ever could. With deliberate precision, I sent the image to Vera. 1 sentence only, typed and sent with the calm authority of someone who had weathered storms most people couldn't imagine. This was my family birthday that year. It was the culmination of years of silent endurance, and the simplest of messages carried the weight of decades of injustice. I didn't post commentary. I didn't explain. I simply posted the image on my podcast feed, the caption minimal, almost cruel in its restraint. Not all stories need Hollywood endings. The response was immediate. Social media erupted. The narrative they had tried to fabricate collapsed under the undeniable truth. Public opinion shifted. Vera's movie deal faltered. Sponsors pulled out in droves, unwilling to associate with manipulation exposed so blatantly. The silence, once used against me, now belonged solely to me, unshakable and complete. Later, I returned to the YMCA where I had once scrambled for a shower and a sense of normalcy. The locker room smelled faintly of bleach and damp towels, familiar yet distant, echoing with ghosts of past hardships. I sat alone on the cold bench, closing my eyes and letting the faint hum of fluorescent lights mingle with the rhythm of my heartbeat. "I'm still here," I whispered aloud, the words both a reassurance and a declaration. The day bled into evening, the city streets outside alive with mundane life, joggers passing under lamplight, distant sirens, the soft murmur of conversation. I prepared for my next recording, reviewing notes, marking key points, and ensuring every episode carried the precision and weight of truth. The phone buzzed, a single notification from an unknown number. A producer. Their message was succinct but electrifying. "We want your version, not theirs. Just you, telling it as it was." My pulse quickened, but not from fear. Anticipation, excitement, and the calm of someone who had survived far worse filled me. This was my story, my voice, my reclamation. I had built something louder than their narratives, louder than their silence, louder than the erasure of a childhood they thought they could control. I sat back, inhaling deeply, the air cool against my skin, and let a slow smile spread across my face. Each challenge, each betrayal, each moment of erasure had led me here. The room felt expansive, though small, intimate yet monumental. The walls, the floor, the faint buzz of lights, they all bore witness to a singular truth. I was no longer invisible. I had become the voice, the force, and the memory they could never fabricate. And yet, as the city settled into night, I felt the quiet thrill of anticipation. The producer's call had opened a door, but what lay beyond it was mine to shape, mine to tell, mine to wield. I could recount, reflect, and reveal with precision. I could channel years of abandonment into clarity and impact. Every setback, every manipulation, every stolen moment had prepared me for this exact point in time. I imagined Vera watching, knowing she had underestimated me. Her tears, her pleas, her empty gestures, they were nothing now. They would never take my name, my voice, or the truth I had forged from silence and survival. And for the first time in my life, I felt unassailable, grounded in a dignity that no one could touch. The morning light was soft, casting long shadows across the apartment that had slowly become my sanctuary. For years, I had wandered through invisible corridors, leaving pieces of myself scattered like breadcrumbs. Now, as I walked past the framed photograph from that first night in the storage unit, the memory still sent a shiver through me. But it no longer held power over my life. It was proof, not pain. Proof that I had survived. Proof that I had endured. Proof that I had become the author of my own story. I sat at my desk, laptop humming, as the final edits for the limited docuseries rolled onto the screen. Figure It Out was no longer just a podcast. It had evolved into something larger, something far-reaching. The first episode, The Girl Who Was Left with a Note, was deliberately raw. No dramatic music, no cinematic lighting tricks, just voice, silence, and evidence. Each word, each pause, every breath I had taken during those years of abandonment resonated with the truth. The emails and messages started pouring in almost immediately. Survivors of neglect, abandonment, and fractured families poured out their hearts, connecting in ways I had never anticipated. One email stood out. "I thought I was the only ghost. I thought nobody remembered me. Nobody wanted me." I read it slowly, letting the weight of their words settle over me. It was an echo of my own voice, a mirror of all those lonely nights, the quiet moments spent in the corner of a library or hiding in a storage unit. My story had touched someone else, and that mattered more than any applause or recognition. The docuseries gained traction quickly. It was nominated for an Emmy. I didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, I watched from my apartment in Seattle, surrounded by greenery and stacks of books, objects that had been my companions throughout the years. They were my trophies. The walls were silent witnesses to a life rebuilt from silence, loneliness, and perseverance. Vera, predictably, had her own downfall. The book deal she had touted for years crumbled. Her so-called parenting expert brand, once glossy and polished, became fodder for internet ridicule. Interviews she gave were met with incredulity. Her hollow defenses, "I did what I thought was best," were met with public skepticism. She was never charged. Too many years had passed, but the public judgment was enough. Reputation, it seemed, could indeed crumble faster than legal statutes. I never reached out. I didn't need to. Closure wasn't in their acknowledgement, it was in my actions. I channeled the remnants of my past into something constructive, the Storage Project, a nonprofit dedicated to assisting abandoned youth, housing, therapy, education. I wanted to provide the scaffolding that had never existed for me. Every donation, every volunteer, every child who found a safe place reminded me that while I had been neglected, I was now building a foundation stronger than any courtroom judgment could offer. I framed the photo from that first night in my storage unit and placed it on my desk. The hoodie, the cardboard, the peanut butter jar. It was a relic of survival, a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, dignity could be reclaimed. Each time my eyes met that image, I felt the quiet triumph of having endured without compromise. The city moved outside my windows, indifferent yet alive, streetlights blinking on one by one, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional shout of a late-night pedestrian. It all seemed ordinary, yet through the ordinary, my life had carved out an extraordinary path. I reflected on the years, the betrayals, the moments of crushing invisibility, and I realized the true reward wasn't fame or acknowledgement. It was being seen, truly seen, by oneself. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closing briefly, inhaling the familiar scent of paper and coffee, the comfort of routine and self-possession. Being loved, I had learned, didn't mean being chosen. It meant being witnessed, being acknowledged, being recognized in your fullness, even if you had to do it for yourself. And in that quiet moment, I knew I saw myself fully for the first time. The phone buzzed on the desk. A journalist, a former listener, someone connected to the docuseries. They wanted an interview, a deep dive into the personal journey behind the voice everyone now recognized. I smiled. I didn't need to justify myself to anyone. My story was no longer for validation. It was for impact, for the unseen children, the invisible teens, the abandoned youth who might recognize themselves in my experience and realize that survival was possible, and more than that, so was thriving. Evening came, the sky turning a muted orange, then fading to indigo. I stood at the window, looking out at the city lights flickering on, each apartment a story of its own, and I whispered, softly but with certainty, I survived. I endured. I built something they could never touch. And that's how it ended. Not with a confrontation, not with revenge, not with retribution. It ended with quiet victory, the kind of triumph that didn't need applause, because it had already been won in the silent, unseen moments of endurance. My name, my story, my voice, they belonged to me, untouchable, indestructible, and true. And that's the last time I ever heard from them. Silence. But this time, it was mine. Before we wrap up, remember this. Resilience isn't just about surviving. It's about reclaiming your voice, your dignity, and your story. Celine's journey reminds us that even when the people who should protect us fail, we have the power to define our own path. What would you do if you were left to figure it out on your own? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of courage, survival, and justice.